welcome to the History of Musical Theatre podcast, Season 2. I'm Rowan Campbell, and I am your host. Have you ever noticed that everyone really loves West Side Story? Like, still. After all this time, it is still one of the best loved shows. Now, my mum says I shouldn't use the word love there because it's sad. It's a sad show. But I've heard theatre people say they love Les Mis. And Act 2 of that is just everyone done. So, I chose my words, and I'm gonna stick to them. This is really unusual. Like, how many other shows from the 50s do people really know? Like, ordinary people. To prove this hypothesis, I decided to do an experiment. Here is the first interview with the aforementioned mum, who was cooking a delicious soup at the time. Please excuse the assorted cooking noises and terrible phone microphone. And also, this was recorded quite a few weeks ago. So, before having friends and family became illegal.
This is my mum answering while cooking. First question, what is your favourite musical?
That's like asking who my favourite child is.
Who is your favourite child?
I'm not going to answer that. I don't have a favourite.
Okay, you don't have a favourite musical.
I do have a favourite musical. My favourite musical is probably... My favourite old musical is probably Camelot, and my favourite new musical is Hamilton.
Cool.
Can I say that?
Yes, you can. Yes, you absolutely can. Have you ever seen West Side Story?
Yes, I have.
How many times do you think you've seen it?
I've seen a school version and an adult version.
I'm going to read you a list of shows, and I need you to tell me yes or no if you've seen them or if you're familiar with them. Alright. South Pacific.
Familiar with it. Familiar with its music. Haven't seen it.
Guys and Dolls.
Familiar with it. That of its existence. I know it exists.
Guys and Dolls exists.
It exists.
The King and I.
My mother's favourite musical.
Yeah.
Very racist.
Wonderful Town.
Never heard of it.
Kismet.
Never heard of it.
The Pajama Game.
I've heard of it. Sounds like an Elvis movie, but I haven't seen it.
Damn Yankees.
Haven't seen it. Haven't heard of it.
My Fair Lady.
I've seen it live a couple of times. School version and adult version. And on film. Lots of times. Pretty cool music.
Is that Mama's other favourite musical?
Probably.
Redhead.
Never heard of it.
The Music Man.
Is that what Dick Van Dyke is?
I don't know.
Sure. I've heard of it.
Okay.
Obviously I haven't seen it.
Cool. Thank you.
My mum specifically requested that the record show that during the interview she forgot about Mary Poppins, which is another favourite musical of hers. Also, that soup was so good. This next interview comes from my husband, Matt, who is not a massive musical fan, but is a fan of helping me.
Hit me up, let's do this.
All right. I'm going to read you a list of shows. I want you to tell me if you have seen them, if you know them, what's your familiarity with them.
Okay.
Okay. South Pacific.
No idea.
Guys and Dolls.
Heard of it?
The King and I.
No.
Wonderful Town.
No.
Kismet.
Nope.
The Pajama Game.
Nope.
Damn Yankees.
Nope.
My Fair Lady.
Yes, I know that one pretty well.
The Music Man.
Nope.
Redhead.
Nope.
Okay. And what's your favourite musical?
Hades Town by Anais Mitchell.
Yep. And how disappointed in you do you think your parents are?
They probably don't care that much. Yeah. They probably have a go at me, but other than that, they probably don't mind that much.
Yeah. Do you know West Side Story?
I know of it.
You know of it? Have you ever seen it?
No.
Returning once again to the studio, aka a literal cupboard under the stairs, I feel like it's important to point out that even though Matt said his favourite musical was Hadestown, a new hip cool musical, he's not hip and cool with musicals. He knows, like, that one, Hamilton, The Greatest Showman. I think that's his top 3. I have personally seen My Fair Lady and The King and I, and I'd say I was familiar with South Pacific, Guys and Dolls, and The Music Man. To varying degrees. Actually, probably in that order. I've seen the film version of My Fair Lady, as well as a professional stage production with Opera Australia, which Julie Andrews directed. It was really good. With West Side Story, on the other hand, I've seen the film, a school production, which had some of my friends in it, and the recent Opera Australia production, and a bootleg of the bilingual production. I feel very differently about watching bootlegs of a show that's closed and isn't touring than of one that's running. South Pacific, Guys and Dolls, The King and I, Wonderful Town, Kismet, The Pajama Game, Damn Yankees, My Fair Lady, The Music Man, Redhead, West Side Story. I would like to take a minute to formally apologise to any friends, family, and audience members with a science background for my use and abuse of the term experiment. I'm not a particularly scientifically minded person. I once left a pot lid on a hot plate, thinking that a different one was on, until the plastic of the lid started to melt. No problems, no worries, I got this, I thought. I'll just take the lid and run it under some cold water. Yes, it did smash. Yes, I did feel like an idiot, and yes, it did lead to a panic attack. This survey is about as scientific as I get. I also did exclude from my sample people who are really into musical theatre. Because the point wasn't that musical theatre nerds know musicals. Anyone could have told you that. The point was that normal people know West Side Story. People who don't belt Wicked in the shower. People who don't obsess about Sutton Foster. She's in a revival of The Music Man next year and I really want to go, but I can't because it's in New York. People who don't have strong opinions about the casting of the Dear Evan Hansen movie. I did see one comment, which was, at least it's not James Corden. Which is fair. Normal people. I also excluded from the sample my mother and father-in-law because they love 40s and 50s movie musicals. I've had them recommend Kismet, Calamity Jane, others to me, just as something to watch. Once I'm allowed to go back for family dinners at their place, I will conduct the same interview again, because I'm curious to find out how many of these shows they have actually seen. So stay tuned for that. The list I provided earlier was every show that won the Tony Award for Best Musical between 1950 and 1959, and West Side Story. There are some well-known shows in this list. South Pacific and The King and I are both well-known Rodgers and Hammerstein shows. My Fair Lady is still a popular show owing to its wonderful music, and Julie Andrews' performance on stage, and Audrey Hepburn's performance in the film. Both The Music Man and Guys and Dolls function as museum pieces of a 50s musical. Actually, all 5 of these shows do, to some extent. But not West Side Story. West Side Story is a reimagining of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, set in the West Side of New York. One day, I promise, there will be a season of the podcast which doesn't feature a show named after the place it's set. Next up, Chicago. Chicago actually isn't the next show. I lied to you. The story centers on a conflict between the Sharks, a gang of Puerto Rican immigrants, and the Jets, a gang made up of the American children of Polish immigrants. The original concept is credited to Jerome Robbins, who also choreographed. There is some debate as to whether this crediting is 100% accurate, but I will be discussing that in a later episode. The music is by Leonard Bernstein, and the book is by Arthur Lawrence. It also features lyrics by Stephen Sondheim. This show is still seriously popular. Friends of mine did this show at school. My aunt directed a production at the school she teaches at. Opera Australia did a production which, A, did an impressive outdoor run at Mrs. Macquarie's Point on their stage island. I'm going to link a video in the show notes of the stage island being moved into place because it is truly incredible. I didn't see that particular production, but I did see Turandot on the stage island a few years earlier, and it featured a fire-breathing dragon and fireworks. And B, this West Side Story production restarted its tour after COVID lockdowns 1.0, while a number of their other musicals, like The Light in the Piazza and The Secret Garden, had their production cancelled. I saw this production, and it was amazing. On their Instagram page, they used the quote, "The timeless musical Australia needs now," from an E! News review. Now, leaving Australia, there have been a number of Broadway revivals since the original production. Like, a huge number. In 1960, 1964, and 1968. In 2009, the show was revived again and had lyrics in both English and Spanish. The new Spanish lyrics were by none other than Mr. Lin-Manuel Miranda. Yes, the Hamilton guy. After that was a 2020 revival directed by Ivan Ho. This production was notable because they had new choreography, which most don't, which was created by Anna Teresa de Kirkenmaker. I want to ask people to have easier names, but my first name is Remington, and my maiden name, they changed the spelling at one point historically to make it easier for people to pronounce, and it didn't. It just opened up a bunch of new ways to say it wrong. I married into an easy name, though. West Side Story had West End productions in 1958 and 1998, as well as US tours in 1959, 1985, 1995, and 2010. That's a lot. The New York City Ballet and a number of other ballet companies perform West Side Story Suite in their repertoire, which is basically all the dance numbers from West Side Story. The American Dance Machine, which was founded by a member of the original cast, produced a socially distanced video version of the song Cool, relating the tension in the song to the tension of the lockdowns. They also did a roundtable discussion talking about making the video, the recent Broadway revival, and working on the show Jerome Robbins' Broadway. The American Dance Machine was basically set up to save choreography, to store it in video archives and make it accessible so that, like the music and the lyrics of the shows, the choreography could be kept to be studied and learnt and discussed. As someone who is obsessed with musical theatre dance, I, for one, love that this exists. Well, that kind of brings us into media, doesn't it? The biggest, most obvious piece of media is the original film. It starred Rita Moreno, among others, and has remained pretty popular. My father-in-law says he can only watch it once a decade because it's too sad, and that it has been about 10 years since he watched it last, so he will watch it again in conjunction to listening to this show. My in-laws are very supportive. The film has its issues. Brownface is a big one, and dubbing, but it's still regarded as a classic. In popular culture, in the late 50s, the prologue, i.e. the finger-snapping bit, was used in a deodorant commercial. I assume that their tagline was, "Deodorant so good you can get into a gang fight," or "Deodorant for juvenile delinquents with impeccable ballet technique." Should I go into marketing? Is that my calling? Cracked has an excellent sketch from quite a while back in which West Side Story, among other shows, is used to make the argument that combat and kung fu movies are basically just musicals for guys. This includes, like, superhero movies, and I definitely think the existence of Hugh Jackman really helps to solidify that point. That guy plays Wolverine so that he can do the Music Man. The Disney Channel movie Teen Beach Movie featured two protagonists finding themselves transported into the film Wet Side Story, which is all about the conflict between the surfers and the bikers. That's a great movie. Teen Beach Movie's choreographer, Christopher Scott, has since choreographed the recent In the Heights film, whose composer and lyricist, the Hamilton guy again, claims West Side Story as a primary inspiration, both stylistically and in the precedents it set for Latino and Latina performers in musical theatre. We'll talk about that more in a later episode. Terry Pratchett, who is beloved of both my husband and my brother-in-law, took some inspiration from West Side Story in his Discworld series. The feuding families in that series are the Venturi and Selici. Again, I'm bad at pronouncing things. Those names, though, happen to be the scientific names for jets and sharks, respectively. I saw a headline at the time of writing literally yesterday in a newspaper at my local Vietnamese bakery, which read, West Slide Glory, about a sports team getting a goal. As a side note, West Slide Glory is really hard to say when you're used to saying West Side Story. The third season of the very musical TV show Glee used as a key plot point the school's production of West Side Story, which had the characters auditioning, rehearsing, and performing the show. It was also criticised for the lack of Latino and Latina performers in that production. Keeping West Side Story in the zeitgeist into the future is the newest film adaptation, coming this year, 2021, for those visiting us from the future. Is it cool there? Do you have flying cars? Do I want a flying car? It's being directed by Steven Spielberg, and the cast has some notable film actors like Ansel Elgort from The Fault in Our Stars, Divergent, and Baby Driver, as well as some serious talent being pulled from Broadway. Ariana DeBose is largely known for her role in the ensemble and as the Bullet in Hamilton. You can see her doing this role in the recording on Disney+. She will be playing Anita. Mike Feist was in the original Broadway cast of both Newsies and Dear Evan Hansen. He's also in the Newsies recording on Disney+, I believe. This sounds like an ad for Disney+, but I'm not sponsored. I scab off my housemate's account. Mike Feist is going to be playing Riff. The show also has some new and more alternative media stars, notably YouTuber and soon-to-be big deal film star Rachel Zegler as Maria, as well as Dance Moms star and Sia's favourite dancer, Maddie Ziegler, as one of the Jets girls. If its young cast wasn't enough, the original Anita, an all-round general film legend, will be making an appearance, Rita Moreno. So, a top director, a mix of established film stars, Broadway stars, new media stars, and I guess the term is literal legends, are coming together to remake a musical from the 50s. This is a really big film, because this is a really big musical. I think I've made my point. But why am I making it? Remy, you ask, why are you going on endlessly about all the times West Side Story has been referenced in the history of ever? Good question. Well, partly I'm not here to talk about shows that were historically insignificant and no one knows about. That could be a different podcast. I'm sure there's some fun conversations to be had there. I'm a massive Tuck Everlasting fan, and that ran like 6 weeks. The main reason I wanted to start by talking about the end was so that we could see how we were going to build towards it. What is it about West Side Story that makes it so compelling and has for so long? Not as a museum piece or a way of calling back to the past. Do you remember when New York was like this? But as something relatable in contemporary society. I hope that in delving into that history, I can shed a little light. Thank you so much for joining me as we debut this new season. Next week, we're going to be looking at choreographer and concept comer-upperer Jerome Robbins. How he developed his style, how he managed to avoid conscription during the war, and what he was like to work with. Until then, something's coming, and it's going to be great. I would like to say a massive thank you to Ollie, who is once again editing this show, and to Zoe, who provided all the musical interludes,